I have been restoring British sports cars for 41 years. I have worked on Aston Martins, Jaguars, Triumphs, MGs, and a 1961 Jaguar E-Type Series 1 Roadster that took me 6 years to find and 3 years to prepare for restoration. That E-Type represented everything I had worked toward in 4 decades of restoration work. Nothing in 41 years prepared me for walking into my garage on a Wednesday morning to find the door forced open, the space empty, and my 1967 Jaguar XKE Series 1.5 coupe gone. Not at a show, not at a specialist shop, gone. The lock had been drilled out. The concrete floor showed fresh tire marks. A single notice taped to the wall informed me that the vehicle had been removed under HOA authority and sold at auction to recover delinquent storage violation fees totaling $850. My 1967 Jaguar XKE Series 1.5 coupe. Matching numbers, factory original paint, documented ownership history from new, 47,000 original miles, appraised 18 months earlier at $195,000 for insurance purposes. Gone, sold to recover $850 in fees I did not owe for violations that did not exist. I stood in that empty garage and looked at the oil spots where she had sat for 2 years and the broken lock mechanism hanging from the door frame, and I remembered what my first restoration mentor told me when I was 23 years old and thought I knew everything. He said, the most dangerous assumption you can make is that people in authority know what they are doing. The HOA was about to learn that lesson in a way that would cost them everything. My name is Thomas Brennan, 68 years old, 41 years as a certified master automotive restoration specialist, Jaguar Heritage Trust certification for 19 years, Society of Automotive Historians member since 1989, expert witness in 22 cases involving vintage British vehicle valuation and authentication. I know what these cars are worth. I know how to prove that worth in court, and I know exactly what happens legally when someone disposes of another person's titled, registered vehicle without proper authority or due process. I purchased the property at Riverside Meadows HOA 9 years ago. The house came with an oversized 2-car garage, detached, structurally sound, fully permitted in county records, listed as an accessory building in the property deed and title insurance documents. I had stored the XKE there for the past 2 years while I completed work on 2 other projects. The car was under a fitted cover. The garage was locked with a commercial-grade padlock. The title was in my name, current registration with the state DMV, current insurance policy listing the vehicle and the storage location. Margaret Chen had been HOA president for 3 years, the kind of person who mistakes procedural authority for actual competence. Violation notices for everything imaginable, grass height measured with a ruler, paint color approval processes that took 4 months, a neighborhood standards committee that existed primarily to tell homeowners their property did not meet Margaret's personal aesthetic preferences. She had decided my detached garage was being used for commercial purposes, 4 violation notices over 8 months. Each cited alleged commercial vehicle storage, alleged business operation, alleged zoning violations. I responded to every single notice with documentation. The garage was residential accessory storage, permitted and legal. The vehicle inside was my personal property. No business operated from the location. No commercial activity occurred on the premises. County zoning records confirmed residential use only. Margaret did not care about documentation. She escalated. Resolution 2020-407 authorized the board to remove and dispose of any contents from any accessory structure found in violation of community standards after 3 compliance failures. The resolution included authorization to auction removed property to recover violation fees and removal costs. I sent a certified letter, return receipt requested, stating clearly that the garage contained a titled motor vehicle valued at approximately $195,000, that I was the legal owner, that the vehicle was properly registered and insured, and that any action to remove or dispose of it without my written consent or a court order would constitute criminal conversion and theft. I included copies of the title, registration, insurance declaration page, and the professional appraisal from 18 months earlier. Margaret signed for the letter on a Tuesday. The auction happened the following Monday. I learned about it on Wednesday when a man named Robert Castellano called me from San Diego asking if I had service records for a 1967 XKE he had just purchased. He had found my business card in the door pocket, along with some maintenance receipts. I asked Robert where he had acquired the car. He told me he had purchased it at an estate and consignment auction run by a company called Premier Asset Auctions. He told me the price, $18,500. He told me the auction listing had described it as an HOA lien recovery sale, property abandoned by a homeowner who had failed to pay storage violation fees. I did not speak for nearly a minute. Robert asked if I was still on the line. I told him I was the legal owner. I told him the car had been stolen. I told him I would call him back. Then I called my attorney, David Corman. David had practiced property law and civil litigation for 28 years. I had worked with him on 2 previous matters, one involving a contract dispute with a parts supplier, another involving an estate appraisal that went to arbitration. When I explained what had happened, David was silent for approximately 10 seconds. Then he said, "They sold a titled registered motor vehicle that you own. That is not an HOA enforcement action. That is theft. Depending on the value in your state's statutes, that is felony theft. This is not a property dispute. This is a criminal matter with a civil component that is going to destroy them." I contacted 4 separate professionals for emergency written appraisals. A Jaguar Heritage Trust certified appraiser, a British sports car auction specialist, a concours judge with 30 years of E-type experience, and an insurance valuation expert. The range came back between $187,000 and $208,000. The HOA had sold a vehicle worth approximately $195,000 for $18,500 to recover $850 in fees that were themselves based on fraudulent violations. David called it the single most reckless act of conversion he had encountered in 28 years of practice. David filed in multiple venues within 48 hours. First, a civil complaint in Superior Court against the HOA, Margaret Chen personally, and the 3 board members who had voted for Resolution 2020-407. The complaint alleged conversion of personal property, sought damages equal to the highest appraisal value of $208,000, plus all attorney fees, expert costs, storage and transport expenses, and punitive damages for willful and malicious conduct. Second, a criminal complaint filed directly with the County District Attorney's Office for grand theft auto and criminal conversion. In our state, theft of property valued over $100,000 is a Class B felony. The HOA had not conducted a property management action. They had committed a serious crime. Third, a civil complaint against Premier Asset Auctions for negligent sale of property they had no legal right to sell. Any competent auction house runs a title search before accepting a vehicle on consignment. A 30-second DMV query would have shown the XKE was titled to a living owner with current registration and no liens, judgments, or encumbrances. Fourth, an emergency motion to void the sale on grounds that the seller possessed no legal title or authority to convey ownership. David also filed a temporary restraining order to prevent any further disposition or modification of the vehicle pending resolution. Robert Castellano was remarkably cooperative when David contacted him. Robert said he had suspected something was wrong when the auction paperwork included no title, only a bill of sale from the HOA, and a notarized statement claiming the vehicle had been abandoned. Robert voluntarily agreed to return the vehicle and cooperate fully with the legal proceedings. He asked only that his $18,500 purchase price be refunded and that he not be held liable for something he had purchased in good faith. David assured him that would happen. The HOA's insurance carrier received the civil filing within 36 hours. David's cover letter was 3 pages long and methodical. It detailed every element of the conversion, noted that the wrongful sale of a titled vehicle worth over $200,000 was almost certainly excluded from standard HOA liability coverage, and highlighted that Margaret Chen's personal direction of the sale, after receiving certified notice of the vehicle's value and my ownership, created individual liability that the HOA's policy would not cover. The carrier's attorney called David that same afternoon. Margaret Chen's personal homeowner's insurance carrier called the next morning. The car came home in 23 days. Robert Castellano returned it voluntarily after the court issued a preliminary order voiding the sale. The HOA reimbursed his $18,500 in full plus his transport costs to pick up the vehicle and his attorney fees for reviewing the matter. Robert sent me a handwritten letter saying he was sorry for what had happened, that he had always wanted an E-type, and that if I ever decided to sell it legitimately to please consider him first. A decent request from a man who had handled an impossible situation with complete integrity and honesty. The civil settlement took 21 weeks. The confidentiality agreement prevents me from stating the exact amount. David's demand was based on the highest appraisal of $208,000 plus all costs, all fees, compensation for the emotional distress of having a vehicle I had owned for years stolen and sold while I was simply living my life, and punitive damages for conduct that David characterized as willful, malicious, and shockingly reckless. The HOA's liability carrier covered the organizational portion of the settlement. Margaret Chen's personal homeowner's policy covered her individual exposure after her carrier's legal team concluded she had personally directed the auction of a titled vehicle after receiving explicit written notice of its value and ownership status. and had failed to perform even the most basic due diligence that any reasonable person would have performed. The county district attorney opened a formal criminal investigation within 2 weeks of David's filing. Felony charges against Margaret Chen were ultimately not filed in exchange for her full cooperation with the civil proceedings and her immediate resignation from the board. Premier Asset Auctions received a formal regulatory finding from the State Auctioneer Licensing Board and was required to implement mandatory title verification protocols before accepting any vehicle consignment from any source. Margaret resigned 4 days after the criminal investigation was announced. No statement. No apology, no acknowledgement. 3 of the 4 board members who had voted for Resolution 2020-407 resigned within the following 2 weeks. The new board, elected in an emergency special meeting, repealed Resolution 2020-407 immediately. They reviewed every resolution Margaret had passed during her 3 years as president. 14 contained procedural defects, legal errors, or exceeded the board's authority under the community's governing documents. The new board permanently amended the CC&Rs to prohibit any HOA action involving the contents of any structure, accessory or otherwise, without written owner consent or a court order. They also implemented a mandatory legal review requirement for any resolution authorizing the removal or disposal of homeowner property. The XKE is back in the garage, still under its fitted cover, still waiting for restoration to begin. The restoration starts next spring. Every time I open that garage door and see her sitting there in the shadows, I think about Margaret Chen and Resolution 2020-407 and the 30-second title search she never bothered to run. 41 years working on cars built by engineers who understood that precision matters, that details matter, that the difference between excellence and mediocrity is the care you take with things most people never see. Margaret never looked at what was in that garage. She never checked. She never verified. That was her mistake. A $195,000 mistake that cost her and the HOA significantly more than that. If you want to see more stories of justice served, hit subscribe because the next HOA disaster might be even more unbelievable than this one.